The needle legend, an ancient secret. Hello, my fellow breeders. Welcome back to Canary Santos Costa. Today, we're diving into a mystery that has haunted ornithology for decades, the needle test. Whether you've been in this world for a long time or a short one, you've probably heard of a traditional, almost mystical method to discover the sex of your birds. A needle, a thread, a mysterious swing, and an answer that seems to come from beyond. But what is it, after all? Witchcraft? A superstition of older breeders or an infallible, ancient technique? I'm talking about an ancestral secret, a legend passed down by word of mouth that many use, but few understand. The idea is simple and intriguing. With the power of a simple needle, you can unravel what nature hides. But does the needle really move on its own, revealing if your bird is male or female? Or is there an invisible, or involuntary, force? An explanation that most people ignore. If you want to unravel this enigma once and for all, stick with me until the end of this video, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. Before we continue, if you're passionate about canaries and ornamental birds and don't want to miss the rest of this journey, leave your like and subscribe to the channel right now. And, of course, activate the bell to be notified whenever a new secret is revealed. The test in action. How the movement works. Now that curiosity is in the air, let's get down to business. How do you perform this test? It's surprisingly simple, but the results, well, they're what generate all the controversy. You take a thread, put it through a needle, and then hold the thread, dangling, over your bird's cloaca, about 1 centimeter away. From there, the secret is to remain completely still and observe. The rule is clear: if the needle starts moving in a circle, the bird is a female. If the movement is back and forth, like a pendulum, the bird is a male. The beauty of this method is its simplicity. It doesn't require genetics or blood tests, just a needle and faith in the magic of the moment. Many veteran breeders swear it works, that it's the fastest and cheapest way to identify the sex of their canaries. But here's the key point. Does the needle really move? Or are our minds and bodies influencing the response? In the next topic, we'll put this theory to the test and see, with our own eyes, what really happens. The first revelation. What happens in practice? Now, let's get to the interesting part. On paper, the test seems simple, but in practice, it has a success rate that shocks many breeders. I've even used the test myself and witnessed the phenomenon in countless of my own birds. You place the needle over the bird's lower abdomen, wait a bit, and, as if by magic, the pendulum starts to move. In a female, it makes a circle. In a male, the movement is back and forth. The needle seems to have a life of its own, a hidden intelligence that responds to the bird's energy. The most fascinating thing is that for someone who doesn't know the explanation, the test seems to work with astonishing precision. I've seen experienced breeders use it to separate juvenile birds, and I also decided to perform the test with birds from my aviary. And the test had a 100% success rate. It's true. I first used adult birds, whose sex I was already certain of, to verify if the test would be viable before putting it into practice on the juvenile birds. This is what fuels the legend and the belief in the method's magic. The needle moves, and the answer appears. But does the needle truly have the power to divine? In the next topic, we'll uncover the truth behind this miracle. The turning point. What science says. Now, let's get to the part that separates legend from reality. The vast majority of people believe that the needle moves due to an external, mystical force. There are breeders who respect and strictly follow the traditional methods passed down to us. However, there is no scientific evidence for this phenomenon to occur. Could it be that the needle's movement is not caused by the bird, but rather by the breeder themselves? Some people say that what the breeder witnesses is a phenomenon known as the ideomotor effect. Imagine that your subconscious already knows the answer. As a breeder, you've spent hours observing your birds, and without realizing it, your brain has already identified small nuances that distinguish males and females, such as posture, song, or body shape. When you hold the needle, your hand, in an imperceptible way, transmits micro-movements. Your brain, knowing the answer, makes your hand move in the correct way for the needle to swing, whether in a circle or a pendulum. It's such a subtle effect that you would swear the needle is moving on its own. Could this be the great secret behind the miracle? Is the magic not in the needle or the bird, but in your own mind? What if the test is performed with the thread attached to an inanimate object, with no movement, instead of being in the breeder's hand? The surprise, the element almost no one sees. So, what if the test actually works? There's an alternative theory that suggests the needle doesn't move by magic, but for an almost scientific reason, an energetic response from the animal. The secret that few people know and that could explain the results lies in the magnetic sensitivity of birds. Many birds, especially migratory ones, have the ability to detect the Earth's magnetic field to orient themselves. It's a natural superpower. What if this same sensitivity is what causes the response in the needle test? The pendulum's movement could be a subtle and almost imperceptible reaction to the magnetic field of the needle itself, which is a ferrous metal. It's as if the needle were a compass reacting to the bird's energy, which might be different depending on whether it's male or female. This is a fascinating explanation, which transforms the test from a mere superstition into a possible interaction between magnetism and biology. But is it really that simple? It's important to remember that there are no scientific studies to confirm this theory. In the next topic, we'll unmask the most common flaws of this test and understand why most people don't get precise results. Failures and errors, where the magic disappears. Despite all the theories and legends, the reality is that the needle test can have serious flaws that most people ignore. Why might it fail? The big problem is its dependence on external factors and, most importantly, on the breeder. The needle has no life of its own. It's a pendulum. And like any pendulum, it is susceptible to any movement, no matter how small. Imagine that you, the breeder, are nervous or anxious to know the sex of your bird. Your hands tremble imperceptibly. This tremor is enough to initiate a random movement in the needle, which you might interpret as a response. Muscle tension, breathing, and even the rhythm of your heart can influence the needle. In other words, the test's result doesn't just depend on the bird, but on the breeder's own instability and, more importantly, on their pre-existing belief. If you already think the bird is female, your subconscious mind may force the needle to move in a circle. The test can thus become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is why, for a scientist, the method has no validity whatsoever. However, there are ways to prevent these involuntary movements from harming the needle test. Instead of holding the thread, you can fix it to a stable, motionless surface. You can close doors and windows to avoid drafts. You can also avoid breathing onto the area where the thread and needle are located by turning your head to the side. In addition, you should repeat the test on the same bird several times, at spaced-out intervals, and not consecutively. The truth, the great secret behind the gesture. After all, what is the needle test? If it's not magic or a purely ideomotor effect, what's its real secret? The truth is that the test can be a form of validation, and the great secret behind the gesture has nothing to do with the paranormal, but with the breeder's energy and intention. What we can assume is that the needle, even though it's not a scientific instrument, serves as a channel for your own intuition. Your brain has already registered all the subtle details of your birds, the shape of their heads, the size of their bodies, the way they sing. The test can be just a ritual that allows your subconscious to express its certainty. The needle, therefore, would be an extension of your own hand, responding to the information you already have but haven't yet processed consciously. In other words, the needle test may not be a tool to discover a bird's sex, but rather a tool to reveal what you already know about it. It's a bridge between your practical experience and your breeder's intuition. That's why, for many veterans, the test works. They are not guessing, they are validating their own experience. And when it comes to inexperienced breeders, the challenge, testing in practice, with my birds. Now that we know the theories and the secrets, it's time for the truth. I won't ask you to believe me, but to test with me. I'm going to take some of my canaries, a confirmed adult female, and a thread with a needle. I won't tell you which is which, so you can see the answer for yourself, without any influence. The idea is, what happens when someone who already knows the bird's sex performs the test? Will the needle make the expected movement? What you're seeing on the screen now is the test in practice, in real time. I place the needle over the bird. The movement is, unsurprisingly, circular. Now, the needle goes over the other bird, which you might assume is a male, and the movement is back and forth. For many, this would be definitive proof that the test works. But remember what we talked about regarding possible intuition and the possible ideomotor effect. In my mind, I already knew the bird's sex. Could it be that my hand just followed the command, so subtly that the needle seemed to have a life of its own? I leave it to your discretion to draw whatever conclusions you wish. The conclusion: magic or science? After all we've seen, what's the final answer? Is the needle test a magical technique or a scientific tool? My conclusion, and that of many successful breeders, is this: it's neither one nor the other. The test isn't magic because it has no power of its own. And it's not science because it has no basis in measurable physical principles. What is it, really? Could it be a reflection of your experience and intuition? Or, on the contrary, is there some scientific evidence that has not yet been analyzed and studied? For a novice breeder who still cannot differentiate males from females, the test may fail repeatedly, either because they perform the test incorrectly or because their intuition lacks experience. The veteran breeder, however, may succeed because they perform the test correctly or because their brain, with years of practice and observation, already knows the answer and transmits it subconsciously through the micro-movements of their hand. Thus, the test can prove to be a tool for validation, not discovery. However, to prevent these external factors from in any way compromising the test's result, my advice is to avoid holding the needle's thread and to eliminate all other factors that might influence the final result. The final lesson: why the successful breeder needs more than magic. We've reached the crucial point. If the needle test isn't a tool for discovery, why is it still so popular? The answer is simple and powerful. It reminds us of the deep connection between the breeder and their bird. The magic, the secret, the science. It all comes down to a single factor: your ability to observe and pay attention. The truly successful breeder doesn't rely on myths. They use the time they would spend on esoteric tests to observe their birds, to understand their behavior, and to develop a sensitivity that goes beyond genetics. They know how to differentiate a male's song from a female's, they understand the posture of a bird preparing to mate, and they notice the signs of a chick that will become a champion. The final lesson is this: the needle test might work. How does it work? We don't know. There is no scientific data we can use to argue that it's a reliable and infallible technique. I believe the breeder should not blindly trust this technique, as it is not infallible. The true magic in breeding birds is not in a needle, but in knowledge, patience, and passion. It is in your ability to study, to learn, and to connect with your bird that the answer will always be revealed. However, sometimes many breeders use the test to help distinguish males from females, especially at an early age, when they are still juveniles, and in species and breeds that do not show sexual dimorphism. This was my case with the London fancy canaries, where I first performed the test on adult birds, whose sex I was already certain of, and the result was 100% correct. Afterward, I applied the test to the juvenile birds. And you, have you ever used the needle test to identify the sex of your birds? Did it work, or not? If you liked the video, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your social media. Big hug.